Professor Dr. Peter Baofu, I'm very delighted to welcome here to our studio, the national broadcaster here in Tonga. Can you tell us, firstly, your purpose of your visit to Tonga at the moment? Thank you.
Thank you for having me. It is part of my global tour because I have been traveling around the world in more than 130 different countries by now. And I want to understand humanity on the ground, not just by reading a book or a documentary, but by traveling around and make different observations and try to understand different problems in different cultures and try to provide some solution to global problems. And that's why I have been in so many countries, and I have written more than 178 books. And I have provided more than 145 different new theories and visions of the human future in relation to the mind, society, culture, and nature. So a comprehensive analysis of humanity. So that's exactly why I'm here, because Tonga is part of humanity, and I cannot just ignore that.
So that will make Tonga what number of countries that you have visited so far?
Yeah, I have been in many of them. I have been all over the world. I was in North America, Central America, South America, the Caribbean, Eastern Europe, Western Europe, Central Europe, Africa, the Middle East, South Asia, Central Asia, Southeast Asia, Northeast Asia, Western Asia, the Oceania that I'm in now. I have been everywhere on Earth.
Can you tell us more about what you do and a little bit of background into yourself?
I have been more or less a professor all my life. I'm an academic. I'm an American visionary. I also give a lot of presentations, and I have been on TV a lot around the world, mostly to address some of the global problems that we are facing on Earth. Because I'm very unusual visionary in the sense that I do not focus on one culture, one society, or one people. My focus is on the entire planet Earth. That's why my thinking is always very global, very planetary. And many of the visions that I have, they do not just address problems here. Now, sometimes they project farther into the future. I even go into the future civilization in outer space, in future civilization long time from now. So what I'm doing is very unusual in a way, and plus I don't focus on one subject matter. Mm-hmm. I focus in all of them: the social sciences, the natural sciences, the humanities, and the formal sciences. So a comprehensive analysis of the totality of humanity. That's very unusual because we are in the age of professional specialization, and everyone is a specialist of something. I'm not. In a way, I'm just like a Renaissance man, and people like that are not very popular nowadays in our age, but we need people like that.
You've been in the Pacific. Tell us more about your trip to the countries in the Pacific that brought you here to Tonga.
I was in quite a number of countries in the Pacific, for example, Australia, Tuvalu, Vanuatu, Fiji, Samoa, Tonga, and something like that. I look into some of the issues and problems and successes that they have, and they are a unique group in a way. Some of the problems that they have are quite common in many other countries on Earth, but some of the problems that they have and the way that they address the problem are different. So it's not like they are the same. They are not, but we are part of humanity anyway. So we must have something in common to be part of humanity. But on the other hand, we have different cultures, different societies, different peoples. So to address some of this issue, you have to understand the local people too. But at the same time, many of the solutions are also compatible with some of the problems that other peoples have been facing on Earth. So there's good and bad on both sides.
I understand that you've had more than 5 academic degrees. Can you tell us more on that?
Yeah, I get my PhD. I get 2 degrees in economics. One in economics, 2 in philosophy, 2 in political science, plus an unfinished PhD in economics, plus a minor in mathematics. But that was my education more than almost 30 years ago. But since then, I have been doing a lot of other things because I'm transcending into what I used to do. So nowadays, as you become more mature or intellectual, more successful, you more or less study everything by yourself. You stop going to school anymore because now you are at the stage that you can learn everything by yourself. You don't need to go back to school anymore and study. And that's exactly what I'm doing. I have been writing more than 178 books, and many of them are in fields outside my original education because now I learn all of this by myself. I don't need to. For people like me, and that's my intellectual advantage. I have the ability to figure out things that a lot of people could not. So that's why intellectual achievement is one of my major focuses in life.
Professor Dr. Peter Baofu, I understand you are a well-renowned author of this more than 178 scholarly books that you have written. Have these scholarly books been used up by many universities around the world?
It depends on which school. If you go to many of the national universities in the world, like the Library of Congress in Washington, D.C., or the British Library in London, and some other national libraries, you will see many of my books listed in their university libraries. And I have done that in many different countries. I have taught also in many different countries, so in different subjects. Of course, I also use some of my books too. If you go to the internet, you type my name and you will see many of the links about my publication, my books by different booksellers and different libraries, university libraries also, and national libraries. So that give you some kind of idea what I have done. And my PhD is from MIT, Massachusetts Institute of Technology. And so science is also one of my major interests. That's why many of my publications are also on science too, not just in the humanities and the social sciences. But in the end, that's very important because many of the global problems that we are facing are planetary. They are very, very global, and they touch on all fields of knowledge. So it's not sufficient anymore for you to solve any problems just by focusing on one field of knowledge. Let's say economic problem now, you have to go into, let's say, climate change. You have to go into culture. You have to go into psychology, biology. So all of them are linked together in the end. Unfortunately, there are not many people that look into problems like I do, and they comprehensive analysis in all fields of knowledge about any problem. We need more people like that, but because we're in the age of professional specialization, so there are not many people like that. But one of my predictions in many of my visions that I have is that we are moving in what I call the post-human direction. One of the visions that I have is that the human race, as we understand now, like you and me, will not survive anymore. We will become extinct, and there's some new species coming up. In future civilization, we shall be moving toward the age of professional non-specialization. We are spreading out into the mind will be evolving. So I'm a precursor, I'm a pioneer on many of the tremendous visions. It will come in the future. They will be tremendous in the sense of transforming society and culture in a way that we have not foreseen before. So that's why I may call myself a visionary, because I predict the future, I look far into the future, and some of the urgent problems which require some urgent attention and some very unusual solution to them.
So based on what you do, there are many issues here in Tonga that raises a lot of concerns in the national agenda. So what would you propose that Tonga should do to tackle the issue on climate change and illicit drugs, which is a major concern for us here in Tonga?
Okay, those are the two issues which, by the way, also happen in some of the local, your neighbors. Fiji, for example, Vanuatu also have some of the same problems. Let me talk about the drug problem first, because I saw some of them already. Even here in Tonga, some people are smoking. And of course, they don't smoke just in front of the police or the security. They smoke, privately. I saw some of them. But the drug problems require some unusual solutions. Some of the solutions that we have been doing, it doesn't work that well. Even in America, in my country, drug problem is a major problem. Drug trafficking. The U.S. have the largest drug marketing on earth, and a lot of people take drugs. So that is a major problem, and the U.S. have been fighting against that, have not been very successful. In the case of Tonga, maybe I can tell you some of the problems and the solution. I think the drug problem is not just about people who take drugs or people who sell drugs. To solve the problem, it's not sufficient for you just to say you arrest people, you put them into jail, or you put them into a mental hospital and ask them to go through this kind of recovery problem. That's not going to work. I tell you now, that's not going to work because you blame the problem on them. I think the problem is much deeper than that. You need to the problem of drug taking is a social problem, it's an economic problem, it's a cultural problem, it's a psychological problem, a multidimensional. Let me give you some example. Let me first begin with social problem and economic problems because they are related. A lot of people take drugs. In many cases, that's because they have some problem with money. Okay, poverty, for example, or they may not be very poor, but they have some problem to pay for the things that they need for the family, their wife, their children, whatever, their husband. So it's stress. When you cannot pay for what you want in society, it's stressful. And when you are the breadwinner of the family, the burden is on you, and it's stress. Now, some people, what do when they become stressful? They drink, they take drugs, and they beat up their own women. Okay, this is not true only here. You go to many other countries, the same thing. I saw this so many times. So to tackle the problem, you have to understand that many of them here have a social dimension, have an economic problem. You can put them in jail. The next day, someone else will take drugs. You put them in jail, and all of a sudden, your jail has no more rooms because you don't attack the roots of the problem. So this is a good example of the economic problems. They have social dimension. Another example, cultural issue. Tonga, just like many other neighboring countries, you are copying capitalism from the West. Now, the mindset of a capitalist is greed. Materialistic, money, consumption, more consumption is better, more, you consume more. That's why obesity is a major problem, a serious problem in many of the Pacific Islands. Last figure that I saw, I don't know the current one, like more than 70% of the population have obesity problem. Why? You see that? Another problem is also culture too, a laid back. The culture in the Pacific Islands are very laid back. People enjoy life. There's nothing wrong with that. You go to Africa, the same problem. There's nothing wrong with that. You enjoy life, that's your way of life. But I'm just saying there's a trade-off. The more laid back you are, the less hardworking you will become. You don't like to work too much. Now, you consume more, you work less. Now, that is a gap here. I mean, where do you get the money to pay for all this consumption? You want more and more and more, okay? You get so big, okay, fine. It costs money, to consume all of this, to spend all of this, but you also want to work less too because you don't like to work too much. Okay, fine, that's your way of life. But I'm saying there's a trade-off here, there's a gap. This gap is creating social problems. It's stressful for some family people, especially those who have to provide for everyone else in the family. I know that in Tonga, just like in many other countries here in this region, and also in other regions of the world, in Africa, in the Middle East, let's say also in Latin America, for example, sometimes a big family one person is taking care of everyone else, or one or two person, and the family may have 20 people, or 15 people, or 10 people. So the rest of them are not working. But these people, or two or three, whatever, are taking care of everyone. Now, this is stressful, no? This person are taking care of everyone. What if these people do not have sufficient money? Now they're stressed. And what's going to happen now? The most common solution for these people, they are taking drugs. Drinking. And then when they take drugs and drinking a lot, what's going to happen to the mental problems? Now, that is going to get worse. And then they can getting violent, and they beat up their own women in most of the time. When there's some problem in the family, you get drunk, you take drugs, and you don't function that well anymore. Now there's another problem, psychological problem. Some of these people, by the way, has psychological problem to start with. And they are not very good in dealing with stress. People like me, I have stress too, by the way, but I never take drugs, I never drink. I don't need that. I know how to cope with stress like that. But many people do not have the mind that I have. They have a different, and that's why many of the homeless people, some of them have mental problems, psychological problem, emotional problem, work problem. So you see that drug is a reflection of larger problems in society and culture. And the root can be psychological, social, economic, cultural. So if you just say, we spend more money, ask the police to arrest them, put them into jail, send them to 5 years in prison, 10 years, life sentence. Okay, it sounds very nice, but you're not going to resolve the problem. And this is the trade-off. So to redress the issue, you need to look into some of the roots of the problem. Unless you address the roots, you're not going to resolve the problem. I give you one example. I talked to someone told me that he has a child. The child was very young. I do not know the age, 14 or 15 or 11. The child has some problem in school. Okay, so he did not do well in school, and then he mingled with some of his friends who are just like him, and they end up taking drugs from drug dealers. They tempt them. They say, I show you some drug that's good for you. You can study better that way. Now, there's a good example. Some people, they have some psychological problem to start with, and they are young too. And you tempt them like that, they are very vulnerable. Okay, I was young too. I used to be in my teen. Okay, but I was not vulnerable because I don't have this kind of problem. Okay, and when people came to me, I just ignored them. I asked them to walk away. Okay, but this child was vulnerable. You see that? So you have to understand them that many of these problems are much deeper. So blame them. And another problem is about sociology. The sociology or labeling is also not very useful. We call these people criminal. But when you use the label criminal, you are criminalizing a lot of behaviors which can be very innocent to start with. But you criminalize them. Over time, you criminalize them, you put them on the defensive. They look at you as the enemy in our society. You are their enemy, and they are your enemy. When you think like that, it sounds very macho, very tough, right? It makes you feel good, but you're not solving the problem. You need to address these people, not that they are criminals. There are some police security, when they see some drug, they arrest them, they even beat them up. They are very violent because they are criminals, they are bad people. When the security, the police behave like that, you are making the problem even worse. You need to change the mindset of thinking about all this problem. And then, of course, I have been in many countries, you have police corruption. Sorry to tell you, Tonga is ranked as one of the most corrupt countries in the world, including the police officers in Tonga has been ranked as one of the most corrupt. See, this is deeper problem now. So you cannot just blame on the drug dealers on the supply side and the drug takers on the demand side, and they are the bad people, just get rid of them, everything will be nice. No, because aside of these two groups, you have deeper problems. Unless you address those problems, psychological, social, cultural, economic, for example, and political too, you are not going to resolve the problem. I read some of the action which have been taken in Tonga. I tell you now, you are not going to be successful. I tell you now. because the way that you approach the problem is not, you are not addressing the roots of the problem. I think this issue has to be discussed in your national parliament, not just by inviting people who are there to support whatever group. You need to have an open debate about this. Unfortunately, many of those people that get invited are also politically connected too. They are they are repeating the same thing for their own group, for their own benefit. You have to look for the other side, but right now I don't see any open debate going on. The debate is so toxic, it's so political.
And on climate change as well?
Climate change is also another major issue here in the Pacific Islands, but that's also affecting the entire planet Earth too, not just in Tonga, and also in the Pacific Islands too. You have a lot of things in common. There are also a lot of solutions too. For example, let me give you some example. When I was in Vanuatu, I visited some farmers, and they told me some of the problem about climate change. I asked them, how does it affect your production? They say, well, some of the crops that we used to produce, we cannot produce them anymore because it's getting too hot. And we don't have sufficient water, drought and all that. And the temperature is very high. It's very hot. So I said, what do you do? They said, well, we are switching now. We do not produce those crops anymore. Now we switch to produce other crops. They are much more resistant to heat. In fact, now we can even harvest them all season long because it's hotter now. They grow very fast. So it's good for us. Now we can plant them several times throughout the years on different lands, of course. So throughout the year, we can always harvest. In fact, it's more profitable for us now. We can sell more now. Okay, there's one solution. So is to how do you adapt with climate change? Climate change by itself is not necessarily bad. It's just how you adapt to that. If you adapt to that successfully, you will be okay, you will survive. But if you don't, you will become extinct, just like in evolution. Another solution is biotechnology. In the US, for example, we also have the same problem, but now what did they do? They introduced biotechnology through genetic engineering or some other thing. Now they create some plants, some animals which are much more drought resistant, heat resistant. So the plants, the crops, instead of dying out quickly because of the high temperature, they become much more resistant to drought and high temperature. We use biotechnology. We change the genetic makeup of the plants and the crops and the animals. So, and we breed them. So over time, those are different crops. We change them genetically with biotechnology. So, and then we harvest them. Now they are much more resistant to climate change. Okay, we're still in the beginning of doing that. Another solution. The third one is that many of the local economies, including Tonga, is depending too much on agriculture and tourism. It's not sustainable in the longer term. You need to move out of agriculture and tourism. You need to do something else. And also, many of the countries over here, also they're sending a lot of laborers to New Zealand, Australia, the US, and so on to work. I think that your economy, if you continue to depend on tourism, agriculture, and immigration, you will lose in the long term. It's not sustainable. You need to find out an economy which is much more productive. You go into other sectors of the economy, manufacturing, service sector, for example, education, science, innovation, and all that. So I say all the most powerful, most advanced countries on earth, they are not dependent on agriculture. They do not depend on tourism. They do not depend on immigration. On the contrary, they do something else. So you need to move out of those sectors. That's the third solution. The fourth solution is that I think that some of the local countries over here, Tonga, Fiji, Tuvalu, Micronesia, Marshall Islands, Solomon Islands, Nauru, Palau, and all those countries, I think they need to work together as a group because you are too small. Think about it. In Tonga, the population is only about 100,000. In Tuvalu, there's only about 10,000 people. My university, MIT, has more student population than the entire population in Tuvalu. You are too small. climate change is a global problem. You cannot address climate change problem by working by yourself because you are too tiny, too small. You don't have sufficient capital to deal with that problem. You need to cooperate together. This, the Pacific Islands Forum is a good example, but you need to work more on that. Right now, they are not unified. Right now, they are divisive. Each person is saying something else, and some of them are not work together. Australia, as you know, just I think last year bought some nuclear submarines from the U.S., but it's a violation of the Pacific Island Creed that we should be nuclear free. You see that different countries are not working together. They pursue their own interests at the expense of the rest of the group. So I do think that, and plus you are dependent on outside powers, Australia, New Zealand, and the U.S. That is also not good for you. You have to look into yourself. I think that the Pacific Island, the more small countries should unify together, not in a nation state, but like as a group, work more closely together, cooperate with each other to deal with the problem of climate change collectively, not individually. So you ask me, how do you cope with that? I think there are a lot of different solutions. In fact, I gave you some 4 solutions already. Maybe another problem that I see, which is very common in the Pacific Islands, is land ownership in this culture. That kind of system has been there for hundreds of years. It's very bad in many ways for economic development because you are impoverishing yourself. The land system in the Pacific Islands, the same thing in many other local countries, is that the land cannot be sold. The land is inherent from one generation to the next. And in Samoa, for example, many of the lands in the front, you will see a graveyard. Their father, the mother, the grandfather, whoever, when they die, they bury them in their home. I mean, outside them. So that is an indication that this land is mine, belong to my family. They are not sold. Now, that is very bad for agricultural development, for example, because you will see that many of the most successful agricultural practices are often dependent on farmers. They can invest, they can expand, they can grow. But when you have a system like that, the land is divided into so many different families and they cannot be sold or anything. And you can list them, fine. But many farmers are very reluctant to expand the business if they know that this land is not theirs. In fact, they can be canceled anytime. They cannot plan long term. Okay, and once the land is not yours, and you cannot plan long term because the lease can be adjusted anytime, and you know that if something happens, you will lose all of this investment. So it's very bad for agricultural development. This kind of system, I know that it is part of the local culture. I'm just saying that maybe it's also time to think about your local culture, is that some of the practices are counterproductive for development. Again, it's up to you to decide because that's your way of life. So no one can tell you what to do. I can only tell you that if you pick one thing, they have consequences. The consequences will be some of the trade-offs. I want to show you how do you choose. It's up to you. But my job is to tell you the trade-off. Just like I told you about the laid-back culture. There's also your way of life. Fine, but I tell you now, there are consequences. The consequences is not just obesity, which is about the health problem, but also about economic development because you don't want to work too much. Okay, so this is, and the family system like this over here is good for the family, but it's not good for individual development. So it's that each of them has a trade-off. Now, which one do you choose, or how much is the trade-off that you want to choose? What is the combination? Now that you have to decide. I only give you the solution and the analysis, and then how do you going to pick them? I think that's up to you.
Thank you so much. Those are very, very interesting proposals and solutions that Tonga needs to look into. Lastly, anything that you want to add on to wrap up this interview for this morning?
Normally, I answer question based on the question given to me. I don't have an agenda, but I'm trying to help out as part of my global tour and my research on global problems. And I listen to many of the problems that people spoke to me, and I provide solutions to them. And that's also an educational experience for me as part of my academic research and work for humanity. So I don't have any external question to ask for my own purposes.
Thank you very much for the opportunity.
Okay, thank you for having me.
Yes.